We've located the Avatar's secret lair. Now what? Seaman Oki whispered. The young soldier had a hopeful look on his face as he turned to look at Iroh. All the 3 crew members were looking at the old general expectantly. They are counting on me to know what to do, Iroh realized. Hopefully I won't let them down. Prince Zuko left in such a hurry to liberate the Avatar that he hadn't given them instructions beyond, "You'll figure something out." Iroh peeked out once more over the large boulder they were huddled behind. The Avatar's entourage was still in the cave surrounded by ruins. Exactly where they had been when Iroh and his men found the place almost half an hour ago. 2 people-sized sleeping bags and a lemur cleaning its fur, and the air bison. The usual group minus the Avatar himself. Now was indeed a good time to get creative. Iroh tried to recall what he knew of air bison. He had never spent a great deal of time studying the supposedly extinct species, nor had there been many opportunities to do so. Still, Iroh considered himself a knowledgeable sort of man. Surely he knew something that would help them resolve the situation peacefully. Air bison were considered docile creatures. When faced with a threatening situation, their go-to reaction was flight, not fight. Being the original airbenders, flight was almost always an option to them. The animals avoided conflict, but not to the point the air nomads had. If a bison couldn't escape, or it wouldn't escape because it needed to stay to protect kin or people it was attached to, it would fight. Considering the creature's size and airbending capabilities, having to fight the air bison would be no small effort. This particular bison, Appa, was certainly attached enough to the Avatar that it would fight for its owner. It had proven so much during their first encounter by taking down most of Zuko's crew on the way to the air nomad. Iroh presumed Appa was loyal enough to extend his protective instincts to the Avatar's companions as well. The real question was whether the bison would perceive Iroh and his men as a threat or not. How smart is it? Smart enough to recognize us as enemies by our uniforms? Sensitive enough to realize some of us are firebenders? Reasonable enough to reason with? Iroh just didn't know. Iroh wasn't in the habit of underestimating creatures just because they weren't human, though. He had met dragons, and knew they were at least smart as humans were. Even so, just because the animal was smart didn't mean it thought or behaved like a human would. Intelligence and a certain type of understanding of what rational behavior was didn't always go hand in hand. Appa might be smarter than we all know, probably not smart enough to understand speech, though. Bisons probably have their own nonverbal way of communication. It seemed Iroh wasn't getting any wiser by contemplating the situation. It was good to theorize before acting, but there came a time when the only way to see if these theories were correct was to put them into practice. I have a plan. If I'm right, this shouldn't be too much of a problem, Iroh informed the crew. And if you're not, sir? Seaman Juva didn't look convinced. Should it turn out I was wrong, we shall make a swift retreat and reevaluate the situation from a more comfortable distance. Everyone nodded. They still remembered how easily the bison had taken them down the last time they found it. Excellent. Wait here, Iroh ordered. He got up, left their hiding place, and started slowly to advance on the bison. The animal hadn't moved much during the almost half hour Iroh had been observing it. It was most likely asleep, which meant that if Iroh wished to communicate with it, he'd have to wake it up first. Well, let's hope you're a morning person. Even if the bison wasn't, at least Uncle had plenty of experience dealing with people who were grumpy when woken before sunrise. Then again, it wasn't possible his nephew wasn't so much a grumpy morning person, just grumpy, period. Either way, Iroh had experience. The old man coughed loudly a few times, which got the animal to stir. The bison lifted its massive head, still looking a bit sleepy. When Appa noticed Iroh, it stared at him. He didn't get up, though, most likely because the 2 Water Tribe kids were huddled atop its tail. Good evening, Iroh greeted, hoping his friendly tone conveyed he wasn't an enemy. I'm Iroh. We've met before, though under unpleasant circumstances. Today, however, I've come to extend an olive branch, so to speak, by aiding your ill companions. The bison looked thoughtful and even a bit suspicious, but at least it wasn't attacking him on sight. Encouraged by the progress in their relationship, Iroh took a few measured steps toward the animal. Appa sniffed the air coming from Iroh's way. His eyes narrowed and he began to growl a low growl. Damn, I guess you do remember me. Iroh lifted his hands in a placating gesture and backed off. Appa, what is it? A weak voice asked from one of the sleeping bags. Katara had apparently been stirred by Appa's movements. The girl looked up. Her eyes were feverish and she didn't appear to be fully aware of her surroundings. Iroh stood very still. He had a feeling that Katara being awake would not make his task of gaining Appa's trust any easier. Uncle hoped she wouldn't see him in the dimly lit cave, and that she'd go back to sleep. Too bad. It was exactly then the lemur decided it was a good time to take a closer look at the new arrival. It flew closer to Uncle and landed on top of the man's head, sniffing him fervently, eyes wide and curious. The animal appeared to be unsure what to make of Iroh, but at least it was acting in a friendly manner so far. Should I bathe this morning? Iroh wondered as the lemur climbed onto his arm, still sniffing him all around. Is there something funny about the way I smell? Momo? Sokka joined the conversation. Stop teasing the evil old Fire Nation guy. The casual way Sokka said this, and the blissful smile on his face before he went back to sleep, told Iroh the boy wasn't fully awake. More good luck for Iroh. Katara, however, narrowed her eyes. She was a bit more conscious than her brother, and now clearly trying to determine what was going on. Appa was still growling at Iroh, and Momo was still sniffing him. What is it about my smell? Oh, of course. Iroh realized his mistake. Don't worry, my furry friends, he said quietly in his most reassuring voice. I am not a dragon. I might smell like one, but that's only because I live with one. The lemur looked straight into Iroh's eyes for a long time, and then went back to sniffing him. Yep, the lemur definitely didn't understand speech. The bison, on the other hand, stopped growling. It still looked suspicious at him, though. Iroh briefly weighed his chances of beating an air bison in a one-on-one fight, should the situation take a turn for the worst. He hoped it wouldn't come to that, when neither he nor Appa particularly wanted to fight. Uncle was an experienced fighter, and although he had no desire to hurt anyone, he was fairly sure he would get the upper hand in a fight. Formidable as the air bison was, Appa was clearly best suited for running, not fighting. Also, most animals from other nations were afraid of fire. Plan A had worked well enough, considering the bison had attacked him. Still, I doubted the prolonged conversation would give him further than this. It was time for Plan B. Iroh carefully retreated back to the boulder he and his men were using as a base of operations. You're doing great, sir, Seaman Juva whispered. Couldn't hear what you were saying to them, but they woke up and they still did not attack anyone. So it must have been something pretty convincing. The other two were nodding as well, and Oki said, Funny creature. Lemur, I mean. Oki pointed at the small animal still resting on Iroh's shoulder. Iroh had to agree. Yes, not exactly shy. No one can say you didn't try. Can we now retreat back to the ship? Juva put in. Actually, Iroh said calmly, I still have one more pie show towel up my sleeve. Uncle would be lying if he said the crew looked happy to hear that. No one complained out loud, though. Seaman Oki, do you still have those branches I asked you to pick up at the Herbalist Institute? Oki nodded and held out some branches that were green, round leaves on them. What are you planning? I don't think I'm going to get any friendly terms with the bison just by chatting with him, the general replied and winked an eye at the man. But nothing brings people together like food. Then he turned back to face Appa and walked over to him, holding out the branches. Arrow walked as close as he estimated the bison would let him, then dropped the branches on the ground and retreated. Appa looked dubious and sniffed a couple times. An animal that size was always hungry, and Arrow knew the branches smelled wonderful. The men waited in anticipation. Slowly, Appa got on his 6 legs, shrugged the children off his tail, and took a few steps toward the branches. Then he gulped down I was present in a matter of seconds. A few minutes later, the bison's eyes were glassy and tired. Appa lay back down and began snoring, exactly the reaction Iroh had hoped for. Years ago, Iroh had made the same mistake. He had come across leaves that smelled delightful and wanted to experiment a bit, brewed tea from them. Only later he learned the plant was a rare Earth Kingdom herb used by traditional healers and as an aesthetic. Iroh had noticed and recognized the plant outside the Herbalist Institute. He suspected it had been brought to there for medical use and had since spread wild. The plant wasn't dangerous. Certainly not one of the more dangerous things Iroh had put in his tea during his first tour in the Earth Kingdom. Iroh didn't know exactly how effective it was, but a cup had been enough to put some of his fellow officers to sleep for hours. So Iroh was hopeful a few branches would be the right dose for something as large as a bison. The old firebender felt a bit bad for deceiving his new friend in this way, but at least he could take comfort in the fact that his motives were honorable. "Believe it or not, I am trying to help you." Iroh waited for the crew that it was safe to come out of hiding and proceed with their plan. Aang was feeling awful. Getting caught by the Fire Nation had never been on his to-do list, but the timing was about as bad as it could get. Sokka and Katara were counting on him. The frozen frogs Aang had managed to collect were running from the archers, had thawed in the warmth of his cell, and even had abandoned the young Avatar. Aang was starting to get unusually desperate. How am I going to get out of this? There was a commotion going on outside his cell. The airbender stayed quiet, trying to hear what was happening. It sounded like a struggle. It sounded like a fight. And after that, nothing. Whatever it was over as suddenly as it begun. The door to Aang's cell opened. A sleek, dark figure slid in and closed the door behind him. Aang tried to stretch his neck to see who it was, but the figure turned around. He saw that the mysterious man had a blue, scary-looking mask covering his face. Or it was his face? And it wasn't a man at all. Aang doubted the latter. "Who are you?" Aang asked. The masked figure didn't answer. Instead, it, unsheathed a sword that turned into 2. Now Aang was getting worried. Before the monk had time to say anything more, the figure started to move toward him, his sword swirling and ready to strike. Aang yelped and closed his eyes. There was a metallic clink as the swords hit home. The chains that had been holding Aang's hands fell to the ground, followed closely by the ones that tied to his legs. Aang was stunned. "You want to help me?" The man, however, moved back to the door and peeked behind it, making sure the way was clear. Now he waved his hand, telling Aang to follow him. The air nomad didn't know what the masked man was, but despite his scary appearance, it seemed he wanted to help. Aang went with him. The Avatar was finally in Zuko's custody. Or at least the boy was following him, which was good enough for now. The Blue Spirit led Aang down the corridors and secret hatches, grateful they hadn't run into anyone yet. The Avatar was fast and even sneaky, but he lacked the experience and arrogance it took to pull something like this off. So the longer they were able to avoid confrontation, the better. While the 2 youngsters were walking through a sewer to get under the innermost wall, Zuko peeked a glance the Avatar's way. The boy looked at him curiously. Zuko turned away and picked up the pace. Doesn't he recognize it's me? I mean, most people don't, but we met just this morning. He knows Prince Zuko's in the vicinity. He knows I don't get along with Zhao, surely. His list of candidates can't be that long. Maybe he knows it's me, but fears that saying it out loud might break the spell and remind me that I'm on the wrong side here. Though, probably he doesn't know. I guess it would be pretty hard to picture the kind of man he thinks I am doing anything even remotely like this. Plus, he's never seen me fight. Not really. Not like this, not with my dowel. Zuko wanted to keep his focus on the here and now, but uninvited stray thoughts kept appearing in his mind. Thoughts of Ozai. The more Zuko thought about it, the surer he was on what he was doing. Zuko had no regrets about rescuing the Avatar today. Just like he didn't regret standing up for those soldiers 3 years ago, in that fateful war meeting. In the last 3 years, Zuko had given a lot of thought to that day, especially on what he could have done differently. The prince had tried to understand why his actions had been so bad they couldn't have been forgiven. But to this day, Zuko wasn't sure he would have done it differently. Now that Zuko had let go of trying to win over his father's love, he could look at what had happened with a new perspective. He could rise above his faith in his father's righteousness and look at things the way they really were. If Zuko had stayed quiet that day, nothing of any consequence would have changed. Because nothing had. The men would still have been sent to their deaths. They would still be dead. The biggest change would be that Zuko wouldn't have been banished. Not on that day, anyway. So far the point of view, Zuko had screwed up big time. However, just because Zuko had voiced his opinion in the wrong way at the wrong place at the wrong time, didn't mean his opinion was wrong. What's right is never needless to say out loud, Uncle had said to him years ago. Only now Zuko understood what he meant. There was many things Zuko regretted doing that day, but voicing his opinion against the general's plan wasn't one of them. If one of the things Zuko's banishment was supposed to teach him was that his words that day had been wrong, Zuko hadn't learned his lesson. Zuko pulled himself from the air nomad to the shadows when 2 guards passed above them. After the road was clear, he gestured to Aang that they were going to go above ground now. The boy nodded. Zuko lifted the metal lid and both boys climbed out of the sewer. They quietly ran to the second wall, where Zuko had left a rope hanging. The boys were about halfway through the climb when the alarm was sounded. "Over there! It's the Avatar and the Blue Spirit!" A voice called from the yard. Someone cut the rope and Aang and Zuko started to fall. Aang used an airbending kata to soften their fall. As soon as they were safely on the ground, the soldier had called the Blue Spirit, went into battle stance. Fire soldiers were closing in on them from all sides now. The masked man reacted faster than Aang, which was unusual in itself, but not the only unusual thing about him. The more Aang thought about it, the surer he was that there was something familiar about the way the lean, masked figure moved. He couldn't quite put his finger on what it was, or where he'd seen it before, though. Aang's first reaction was to grab his air staff, but then he remembered it had been destroyed, and that he left his fans at the camp. Airbenders didn't often fight unarmed. They always kept a staff along anyway. But Aang didn't let lack of weaponry slow him down for long. He tackled one of the guards, grabbing the man's spear and turned it into a fighting staff by breaking off the pointy end. Airbenders didn't use lethal weapons. Before Aang had time to move, his mysterious friend had cleared a path to the next gatehouse and was waving to Aang to keep up. The fight that ensued was fast-paced and three-dimensional, despite the enemy's overwhelming numbers. Aang was feeling a bit excited. He and the Blue Spirit made an excellent team, constantly having each other's back. Although his new companion hadn't said a word, they had a silent understanding of what they were doing. They were making stuff up as they went, but they had gotten them on top of the second wall now, so Aang wasn't too worried. The air nomad swept attackers away with his airbending while the Blue Spirit fought them off with his swords. The blades looked sharp and dangerous, but thankfully his new companion was careful with his weaponry. The Blue Spirit appeared to be as reluctant to severely injure anyone as the airbender himself was, which made Aang trust his silent companion more by the minute. Whoever he is, looks like we have a lot in common. Aang noticed an attacker come between the Blue Spirit from behind. "Look out!" The swordman turned just in time to push the attack away with a sweeping motion of his hand. The soldier flew far from them. The blue spirit turned to wave Aang to follow him, but the air nomad was too shocked to move. Did he just? Suddenly all the pieces fell into place. The familiar way the masked man moved, his reluctance to hurt his enemies. And that move he just used a moment ago was a bending kata. A bending kata Aang knew, even if he hadn't seen it performed with swords before. Blue Spirit turned around and noticed Aang wasn't following him. The masked man waved at him frantically, but all Aang could do was stare. Stare and smile. He must have looked like he'd gone mad, but he didn't care. "You!" Aang almost shouted. "You're an airbender?" "I am not an airbender." The Avatar was mistaken, or mad. Those were only logical explanations. Zuko was a firebender. He wasn't an airbender. He was light on his feet, but that didn't make him an airbender. "I saw how you pushed that man away with airbending." The Avatar went on, still smiling like a fool. Surely Zuko couldn't have used his firebending without noticing it himself. He, if anyone, should know that there were firebending techniques that did not require visible fire. But he was careful not to use his firebending, in any of its forms, when portraying the blue spirit. The kid probably had a wild imagination, and was seeing things that he wanted them to be rather than what they were. Zuko had years' experience of that, though never to the point of hallucinations. The Avatar was still standing in place. What should Zuko do? Drag the boy the rest of the way by his collar? Before Zuko had time to make up his mind, the air was full of arrows. The volley was headed for the orange figure, but a good number of the arrows were aimed at him as well. Aang, finally over his moment, noticed the arrows as well. The Yu-Yan were behind them. Zuko had a plan, but there wasn't enough time to send a hand signal where he wanted the other boy to do. Zuko pointed to the other side of the wall and shouted, "Jump!" Both boys were fast enough to get out of the way and behind a solid wall before the arrows rained down on them. Zuko leapt over the side of the wall. He sheathed his dao to free his hands for climbing. Zuko took hold of the ledge of the wall to keep him from falling down the whole way. Normally, Zuko could have easily taken his body crashing to the side of the wall. Now, though, a flash of pain reminded him of the shoulder Toph had injured. Zuko was able to hold on, but only barely. The shoulder wasn't dislocated, but it wasn't working quite right either. Zuko was thankful no one would see the pain on his face under the mask. As Zuko was hanging on, he noticed the Avatar hadn't understood him. The airbender had jumped entirely off the wall and landed smoothly on the ground. The younger boy turned to look at him, looking as confused as Zuko felt. Both boys appeared to be mentally asking the same question. "What did you do that for? I thought we had a plan." Zuko tried to think quickly. He could try to jump down too. The Avatar seemed to be expecting that, probably still on the assumption his masked savior could airbend. Zuko groaned. The prince tried to estimate how long the fall was. Too long, maybe? Since he wasn't an airbender, probably. However, even if he survived the fall unscathed, it would seem insane to give up the advantage of his location for no better reason than that standing on the wall made him a bit easier target for the Yu-Yan. Speaking of which, so apparently they weren't all back on the inner wall with Zhao. Several face-painted archers were on the ground between the last two walls, now closing in on Aang. Zuko bit his lip. The earlier wave of arrows had been meant to lure them into an ambush. How could he have missed that? The airbender dodged the arrows the best he could, but Zuko had already seen how this dance would end. He had to help Aang. Suddenly 2 arrows nailed Zuko's left leg in place by his trousers. Oh shit. If it wasn't for Zuko's years of training, he would have been trapped as soon as the arrows met him. As it was, Zuko was able to wiggle free and roll back on top of the wall. Temporarily safe, at least, but any minute now more soldiers stormed him. Zuko lay flat, holding an injured arm on top of his torso, trying to even his breathing and thinking. Is this how it ends? Wasn't I an arrogant fool to think I could steal the Avatar from the most powerful nation in the world? Should I just cut my losses and try to get out of here while I still can? Zuko opened his eyes. No, this isn't how the story ends. Eri was on the ground, ready to block the Avatar's way if he got past the 3 members of the squad of 12 who were actively on him. The airbender was fast, but there was no doubt about how this would end. The Yu-Yan had already succeeded in capturing the Avatar once. They would do so again. Now they even had the advantage of knowing their enemy. And although the Blue Spirit was an unknown factor, he was nothing a trained squad working as one couldn't handle. They had already managed to drive the Avatar to a trap, and as soon as the airbender was caught, they would go after the thief. He might have slipped from them for now, but he wouldn't go far. A colorful light in the corner of Ari's eye caught his attention. She knew she wasn't supposed to let the Avatar have her sight, but she looked up. She had to know what the flash of light had been. Since Ari was the only one in her squad who looked up, she was the first to see it. The black dragon. He's back? The Avatar had been running along the wall in order to avoid being shot at all sides. The dragon breathed a thin stream of fire between the airbender and the Yu-Yan. Now everyone saw the dragon, but they appeared unsure of what to do about it. The dragon landed on the scorched ground, its eyes never leaving the Yu-Yan, its enemy. No. Ari had to stop her squad from attacking the dragon. She wished to get their attention, but did the hand signal for stand down. Ari hadn't told Colonel Shinyu about her miraculous savior, partly because she feared the man wouldn't believe her, but mostly because dragons had been hunting close to extinction, and Ari hadn't wanted anyone to go looking for this one. She had told her squad everything, though. An important part of why the Yu-Yan were better than anyone else was that they moved as one, and for that to be possible, they had to know each other well. The other archers knew Ari had been saved by a dragon, this particular dragon, and she hoped that her signal was enough to tell them what she wanted to happen next. The leader of their squad, Ursa, nodded at her once. They understood. A life debt was a personal matter, but if Ari's life debt meant she had to go against her orders, and quite possibly against her team, they would rather work as one and not at all. Ari's debt wasn't the only reason they were willing to stand down. Just because firebenders had hunted down the last dragon didn't mean everyone hated them. On the contrary, in the Fire Nation culture, dragons had always been respected. They symbolized many good things. Ari wasn't alone in her wish for the last dragon to live. In unison, all 12 Yu-Yan lowered their bows, not all the way down, in case they needed to defend themselves, but not aiming at anything either. The dragon looked surprised, but reluctantly turned its attention away from the archers and to the Avatar. It was eyeing the boy in such a meaningful way that even the airbender got the hint. "You want me to ride on you?" The Avatar sounded half surprised and half thrilled. The dragon nodded, but instead of lowering its head to let the Avatar climb on its back, it grabbed the Avatar in one of its paws, the same way it had carried Ari the first time they met. The dragon opened its wings and took off, and not a single arrow was fired to stop it. Ari felt relieved and worried. Relieved that her savior hadn't been hurt, but worried for getting herself and possibly her entire squad in trouble. More soldiers and the rest of Yu-Yan arrived at the yard. Ari made her decision. She would take blame for the Avatar's getaway. She wouldn't let her team go down for this. What on earth happened? Admiral Zhao had reached the yard. He wasn't happy. There was a dragon, sir. Hosea stepped up to meet the man. It took the Avatar and flew away. Zhao looked like he was boiling. Yes, I saw the dragon. Everyone did. What amazes me is the part where the dragon calmly flew away, meeting minimal resistance, I might add. Ari opened her mouth to speak, but Hosea was faster. Couldn't get a clear shot, sir. Zhao looked like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. While the Admiral was still looking for strong enough words to describe his feelings, another Yu-Yan innocuously stepped next to Ari. She brushed Ari's hand to get her attention and whispered, "Not a word." The Yu-Yan are supposed to be able to shoot wings off a fly without killing it. How could you not hit something that big? I saw the situation. The field leader of the Yu-Yan stepped in. Hosea is right. It was an impossible angle, with the smoke and the heat distorting the visibility. There is no way to... I could have hit it if I'd been holding a bow and an arrow, Zhao shouted, looking a bit deranged. Even if that had been enough time for an attack, my Yu-Yan's arrows wouldn't have put a dent in that dragon's scale. Colonel Shinyu, the real leader of the stronghold, said calmly, Eri was too stunned to say anything. They are all teaming up against the Admiral to cover up for one of their own? Zhao was back in his office, packing his things. He had ordered his ship to sail first thing in the morning. There wasn't a minute to lose. The Admiral found it incredibly unlikely that the Yuyan had been too dumbfounded to do anything about the dragon. One or two maybe, but an entire squad? Their sudden incompetence was a bit too coordinated to be anything other than planned. What Zhao needed to know was who had been the father of that idea. His money was on Colonel Shinyu, that jealous, unpatriotic fool, but he couldn't openly accuse the man without proof. Zhao had interrogated the archers, but the Yuyan's red wall of silence had kept Zhao from finding the culprit. As much as he would have wanted to, he couldn't have all the Yuyan court-martialed. They were too valuable for the war effort to be locked away in numbers. The worst Zhao could do was write very negatively about them in his next report. "Sir?" A young officer bowed at the Admiral. "Yes?" Zhao hurried the man to go on. "You asked us to keep looking for the Blue Spirit. We've just completed our search in the stronghold in the forest, but there's no sign of the thief." The man visibly hesitated, but eventually went on. "None but this." The soldier handed Zhao a blue opera mask. The mask was smiling at him, menacing and playful. Everyone was laughing at him today, it seemed. Zhao set the mask on fire. The mask was evidence and a possible lead, but it had obviously been left behind on purpose, so it probably didn't hold any clues of the identity of the wearer, and he felt like burning something. He dismissed the soldier, who left in a hurry. Zhao was convinced that all the hardships of tonight, the Blue Spirit, the dragon, the silent mutiny, they were all connected. He couldn't yet see how, yet alone prove it, but when he could, heads were gonna roll. If I've learned anything today, Zhao thought to himself, it is that I'll never use the Yuyan again. No matter how talented they are, they can't be trusted, which makes them no value to my hunt for the Avatar or the conquest of the North. Sokka mumbled but didn't open his eyes. Someone was pushing his shoulder, but he didn't want to get up yet. "A few more minutes, Mom," he said and turned on his side. "You're awake, finally!" Katara was next to him, trying his forehead for fever. "Hey!" Sokka yelped, surprised by the cold touch. "Sokka, you have to get up. We're in trouble." Katara looked worried. "What?" Sokka got up to a sitting position and looked around him, but all I could see were dark walls. "Is someone attacking us?" "No," Katara said solemnly. "We're a bit late for that fight." Sokka had no idea what his sister was talking about. He still felt weak and tired, and Katara wasn't making sense. Upon seeing her brother's blank expression, Katara sighed and irritation continued. "You honestly don't remember anything from the Fire Nation attack on our camp?" "We've been attacked by the Fire Nation?" "Yes, and now we're held prisoner by Prince Zuko." Sokka stared at his sister. "Prisoner, are you sure?" Katara rolled her eyes. Despite her defiant attitude, she too looked pale. "Of course I'm sure. Look around you. We're in a prison inside the Fire Nation warship right now." Sokka took a better look around himself. The room was lit by 2 candles. There was no windows, just one door. The wall and floor were indeed made of metal, and Sokka could feel vibrations through it. Katara's right. We're moving. The room didn't look like a prison cell. Though there were shelves on the wall, most of them had stuff on them and bags of varying sizes. By the smell of them, at least some of the bags held spices or herbs, maybe food. "Are you sure we're on Prince Zuko's ship?" Sokka asked. "It was the old firebender who always travels with him that caught us," Katara replied. "We're locked in Prince Zuko's food closet?" Sokka wouldn't have believed it if he wasn't seeing it with his own eyes. Suddenly, Katara looked miserable. "When I realized what was happening, I tried to put up a fight. I really did. But I was so tired, I didn't have any water left." "It's not your fault, sis. What matters now is that we figure out a way to escape as soon as possible." Sokka took one more look around him to see what was anything in the room he could use for escaping. There were 2 mattresses and their sleeping bags, but Sokka couldn't see the rest of their stuff in the room. Wait a second. Sokka's brain was working a little slow today. Where's Aang? Or Appa? Or Momo? Aang left to get medicine for us, remember? But he never came back. Something awful must have happened to him. I don't know where Appa or Momo are. Katara looked even more miserable. Prince Zuko probably caught them too. Sokka thought that over in his head, but something didn't add up. I'm not sure about that. How long was I out for? I think it's morning again, so a day? Katara said. And how long has Aang gone before we got attacked? Katara looked thoughtful. Most of the day? Aang left during midday. It was already dark when the Fire Nation attacked. Sokka nodded. Then it doesn't really sound like they've captured Aang. What makes you say that? Katara frowned. Remember what that shoe guy said? Prince Zuko needs to capture the Avatar to get him banished. Why would he capture Aang and then stick around for hours to look for us too? Maybe he knew we wouldn't rest him till he saved our friend? Katara's eyes had a hard edge to them. Maybe, Sokka agreed. They had gone after Zuko to save Aang once already. One way or another, Sokka went on, the best thing we can do now is find a way out of here. We won't be of much help to Aang locked in a food closet. Katara nodded. Any ideas? No, but I'll work something out. We'll get out of this, you'll see, Sokka promised. One more thing, Sokka added. The door is locked, right? You tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge at all? Katara glared at him. Hey, just making sure. Zuko had flown through the night, but now the sky grew lighter, reminding him of how late it was. He started to eye the scenery beneath him, looking for a place to land. The Avatar spent what he felt like hours trying to talk to him into going back for his friend, the Blue Spirit, and his sick Water Tribe friends. But now, the other boy had finally fallen asleep. Zuko had tried to communicate with Aang to let him know his imaginary airbending buddy and Katara and Sokka were safe, but his attempts to form a connection had failed. Zuko wasn't sure why, but his power of dragons was really off right now. He hadn't been able to communicate anything despite several tries. Zuko suspected the Avatar hadn't even noticed his efforts. Maybe the Avatar is immune, or maybe I'm just too tired to concentrate on it. Although Zuko was tired and injured, he kept going, because he feared that when he stopped, he would no longer have the energy or determination to get up again. Zuko wasn't feeling too good. Maybe he caught whatever jury he had, after all. Still, he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when he finally captured the Avatar. He couldn't go back to his ship, though. Not as he was. Not when Zhao was lurking around. Also, he had ordered Uncle to set sail. Zuko wasn't even sure where he was, let alone where the ship was. His vision was getting blurry at the edges. He couldn't just let the Avatar go. Zuko saw a mountain. It was as good place as any to land. The slopes were steep and barren, but no one to sneak up on them. Zuko realized a little too late that his injured left paw couldn't hold his weight, and since there was no way Zuko was letting go of the Avatar, he had no front paws left to stand on. Zuko's long body fell ungracefully to the ground, waking up the Avatar in the process. Oh, we've landed. Great. Mind letting go of me now? The Avatar, ever the optimistic, asked. Zuko was barely awake, so he didn't have the energy to even attempt to reply. But he figured his action would speak for themselves. Or more precisely, the lack thereof.